When an emergency, like a wildfire, strikes, it can turn a normal day into a chaotic scramble. The speed and intensity of these events often leave little time for anything but immediate action. In these critical moments, being prepared can be the difference between a stressful evacuation and a calm, confident one. This is especially true for caregivers who have the added responsibility of ensuring the safety of their loved ones with either a disability or dementia. On today's episode, we're exploring why having a plan isn't just a good idea, it's a necessity. We'll learn from disaster preparedness expert Patrick Hardy, also known as Disaster Patrick, about the most effective ways to prepare for an evacuation, ensuring you and your loved ones are ready for anything. Welcome to Fading Memories, your source for all things dementia caregiving. I'm your host, Jen Fink, and I have had 3 generations of loved ones with dementia, and I'm here to share the knowledge I've gained with you. Welcome back, Fading Memories listeners. I always appreciate you tuning in every week. With me today is Patrick Hardy. He is a nationally accredited disaster preparedness professional. Whew, say that 3 times fast early in the morning. I have been doing this show for over 7 years, and we have never had this conversation, which, considering where I live, is absolutely shocking. So without further ado, welcome, Patrick.
Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. So normally I have a guest give their background, but we had a little bit of a conversation yesterday. Patrick and I are planning a disaster preparedness event in my community. So we were working on that yesterday. And rumor has it that you were present at a specific baseball game in 1989 that kind of launched your curiosity and your desire to become a disaster preparedness professional. It's still really hard to say. So you want to give us a little bit about your background and what happened at that momentous baseball game?
Yeah, I grew up a Giants fan, and so they had the World Series in 1989 in the Bay Area, and my parents had told me if you want to go to the World Series, you have to you have to have gotten good grades on the report card and all that, and I'd done well the year before, and so they said, okay, great, we're gonna go. So we went to the World Series, and in the middle of the game was the earthquake. We suddenly had a massive earthquake. For those of you who don't know, who are hearing this, there was the Loma Pietra earthquake. And one of the things that was interesting as a child, first of all, it's a terrifying experience. And you actually, it's interesting because Loma Pietra quake, there's so much video online about that earthquake because the Bay Bridge collapsed. So for those of you who live in the Bay Area, you know what I'm talking about. When the Bay Bridge collapsed, that was pretty massive. And it was something that it shook homes. There was cracks in the fascia. And I was at a ballpark where when as soon as the earthquake started happening, my parents freaked out. Everybody in the stands there was confusion, there was shock, there was fear, there was panic. It was all palpable. But one image in my mind has stuck with me after all these years is that baseball players who were in the dugouts, many of whom were baseball players that I deeply admired. Will Clark was my favorite baseball player. For those of you who are Giants fans in the 80s and early 90s, you know precisely who I'm talking about. And he and other members of the Giants jumped out of the stands, they jumped out of the dugout, and they actually grabbed their family members who were sitting in some of the front rows and grabbed them and just haphazardly, and these are big men. These are most of these baseball players, they're over 6 feet tall, so they are hard to miss. Plus, they're wearing cleats. So the cleats add another inch and a half to their height. And these guys and they're in these white uniforms. They just jump out and they grab their kids and they went into the dugout with them immediately. And it was interesting because later on, I've actually watched some of the live broadcasts. It was on ESPN, and the live broadcast had Al Michaels. And Al Michaels was continuing to do his narration, even though the earthquake was happening. He was giving updates and he was talking about what was going on in the stadium. But it was interesting because the the announcer was saying, we've had an earthquake, please stay in place till we can get the emergency exits, then you're going to exit. But it was very, very, very chaotic, and it's stuck with me ever since. So that happened. I had a series of other disasters occur. That was part of in 1993. I lived in Orange County. We had massive wildfires, practically burned down. For those of you who have ever watched The Real Housewives of Orange County, that area that you see in that show burned to the ground in 1993. Those beautiful homes, $1 million homes, now multi-million-dollar homes, all burned to the floor. When I say they burned to the floor, I mean it was just foundations left. Then in 94, we had the Northridge quake, which was astonishing. And then I became a lifeguard when I was young, and then I went to college. And I loved college. I was wondering what I was going to do with my life because I was studying political science. I was studying economics. And I thought, when you study, and Jennifer, this happens where I don't know, I don't know what your major was in college, but my major in college was political science. And when you're a political science major, here's the thing. Everybody has a cause. Everybody. They want to, eliminate famine, or they want to abolish nuclear weapons, or they want peace in the Middle East. They want something. And so people were asking me throughout the years, because I was the top political science student at the university, and they kept saying, Patrick, what's your cause? What's going to be your thing? And I honestly didn't know. I honestly didn't know. And then I graduated, and then we had Hurricane Katrina. And I watched with my mouth agape that the most powerful nation in the world, actually the most powerful nation of all time, the most managerially sophisticated country with the most powerful states in the country and the most powerful military of all time. And you still had the mess of Hurricane Katrina. We have unlimited money. Basically, the United States the federal government essentially has access to unlimited resources. I mean, they won 2 world wars and they print their own money. So, hey, you got all the resources you want. But I discovered, and I said, wait a minute. This is something that I can do with my life. I can take my vocational background. I'd been an EMT. I worked in an ambulance all through college. So I took my vocational background and I took my political science background and I poured them into a glass. And I said, this is what I want to do because this can be solved in my lifetime. I don't know about famine. I don't know if that can be solved in my lifetime. Nuclear weapons, I don't know. But disaster management, that is solvable in my lifetime if I make that my life's work. And that's the genesis of my career and how I got to where I am.
So you skipped over one major historical wildfire between Loma Prieta and Northridge, and that was the Oakland Hills fire. And what was astonishing about this, that was October of 91.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody, I mean, it was up in the hills, very narrow, like 1.5 lane roads, one way in, one way out. And it happened fast because of the wind, which most people have probably heard. We get wind and then poof, everything is on fire. And everybody kept saying when it gets to the freeway, it'll stop. I mean, I forgot how many lanes it was, 4, 5, 6. It's a lot. They keep adding on. So, but it's a massive amount of concrete, asphalt. There's nothing to burn. And it just jumped the freeway, kind of like a Mother Nature fireball, giving everybody the finger, like we'll show you in your quote fire break. So yeah, that one was astonishing. And then you have a really interesting story about the Paradise Fire. And then we'll get into what we need to do to take care of ourselves in all these lovely little events that seem to happen all the time.
Well, with the Paradise Fire, I had a lot of clients in the area. I work with a lot of modular communities, and a lot of RV parks. I have ended up working with about 75% of them in California that my company did disaster planning with. And in Paradise, it was interesting because I had a facility, I had a property who called me and said, we're right in the middle of the Paradise Fire. And I said, drop whatever you're doing and leave this minute. Like, don't ask any questions, just pack up and leave. And they were able to rapidly evacuate. They got everybody off that property within an hour and a half. That is astonishing, astonishing. But what they did was they followed a very systematic campaign that we designed for them. I created a series of quadrants. That's how I did it. And so I said, you're going to, going to phase these people and then these people and then these people, because the biggest problem with being able to evacuate these parks is the traffic because everything gets backed up. And one of the things that ended up happening was there was a gentleman, he had a Model T. And if you've ever lived the Paradise Fire, you will see something that I have never seen in my career. I've never seen it before or since. A long line of cars trying to evacuate Butte County, which is where Paradise is in Butte County, California. It's very rural. For those who've never been up there, it's very rural, very dry. Even today, very dry and very rural. And there was one road, and there's all these cars burned out. One after the next, just burned out. And one of the cars was a Model T. I couldn't believe it when I first saw it, and I ended up contacting the emergency manager, and I discovered that they had evacuated in that thing. But of course, a Model T is not prepared to be a rapid evacuation vehicle. And so it, like all the other cars, exploded. And I was surprised and shocked that anybody would even try to do that. Why you wouldn't just drive in your normal car and try to leave. And they were trying to convince people, please don't try to leave in antique cars. This is not a good idea, and so, but that's the kind of thing where I tell people, I say, if you're relegated to where you're evacuating your house in your Model T, I think you got a problem with your evacuation program. Because I can understand people's desperation, but if you do a little planning in advance, you think about a little bit, those are the kinds of things those are the kind of desperate decisions you don't have to make.
Yep.
What I say to clients all the time is I say, when you plan, this is what happens. You get involved in a disaster and you have bad option number 1, bad option number 2, and horrible option number 3. And those are the only choices you have left. Versus when you plan in advance and you consider what you need to do, and suddenly you have good option number 1 or bad option number 2, right? And so it sort of gives you additional opportunities to do that. But when you don't plan, then basically you have to evacuate with whatever you have.
Well, that's kind of where I'm at. So we were talking about Loma Prieta. I was telling Patrick yesterday that as a multi-generational Californian, a native to the Bay Area, when I was in 5th grade, we actually studied the 1906 earthquake, which happened in San Francisco, for those of you who are not familiar. And it had a massive fire because it broke the gas lines and, just all kinds of problems even way back then. Fast forward to Loma Prieta, and one thing that really stuck in my mind is the apartment buildings in the Marina District. Now, the Marina District is built on filled in marshlands. I think I don't know what they poured into it, but when it's like building a building on wet sand. Not really your best option. And it's very expensive real estate. And this gentleman was on the TV news. They finally let him to go back into his apartment. And you could tell the apartment was not on the foundation because it was all tilty like a fun house, although it was definitely not fun for him. And he jerks open this closet door and he grabs 2 fairly large duffelish bags. One was red, one was blue. This seared into my brain, and this has been 36 years next month. They were his earthquake kits, and they wouldn't let him go into his apartment for 3 days to get these. And my mother-in-law used to have her car trunk just stuffed with, I don't know, emergency rations and blankets, and I don't know how much of it was rational. She had mental illness, so it was just my gut reaction was, if you're not wearing your disaster preparedness backpack when the disaster strikes, you might just be screwed anyway. So Patrick is going to educate me today on why that attitude is really, really bad. Because I know it's bad, but it's like, what the heck what should I do? But before we get to that, Paradise, I have a fairly historical connection there. As a Rotarian, our club in the Bay Area helped raise money for the Rotary Club up there for the, rebuilding, all that stuff. Was like over $1 million was raised just by Bay Area clubs pretty rapidly, which is a lot of money. I'm sure that was a drop in the bucket, but, and this is the crux of our conversation today. I went to visit my mom kind of during the immediate aftermath, and there was all these new residents in memory care, and I was like, "What happened?" And they're like, "Oh my gosh, they had to evacuate a care home in Paradise, and we've got some of the residents." And I was like, "Oh, that would stop. That would just not be cool, like having to evacuate your loved one with dementia." I've talked to caregivers who have had to do that. And then what really made me want to talk about this today is the sad, sad story that I heard about during the Palisades fire. Was a dad taking care of his adult son with cerebral palsy, and there was no way to get his son out of the house. So they didn't evacuate and they didn't survive. And I thought, what? Hello? So, Patrick, what do we need to know as regular residents of, I live in the Sierra foothills now, wildfires not too far away right now. But then let's move into what we need to do in addition to, like, where should I start with not being so unprepared? And then how would I move into um, taking care of my dog? Because she don't know how to do anything disaster related, and neither would my mom. My mom wouldn't have had a clue, and I'm not sure she would have been real cooperative. So, where do we start?
What I want everyone to do and where I want you to start is different than advice you may have heard in the past. I take a completely different approach than the Red Cross, than FEMA. I take a completely different approach. In fact, the event you and I are going to do is going to be astonishing in its breadth because it's going to be the first time we've done anything quite like this before. Instead of thinking about creating these static written disaster plans that people talk about all the time, write out this and figure, write all these things down, which you and I both know, let's be real, and the listeners here today, none of you have ever, let's be real, let's be honest, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. So what I want people to focus on instead is I want you to think about your own personal processes. In other words, things you need to do every day. Breathe, you need to be able to see, you need to be able to, have to drink things and eat things, and you have to have, comfort for your temperature. You have to think about things psychologically, right? You want to keep yourself focused. You want to make sure you have your ID, you have your phone. Let's be real. These are things that we have to have, regardless of much. I know we watch these preppers where they're teaching us how to make rabbit snares, out of, shoelaces and things like that. And I can appreciate that. I can appreciate it. But in the end, I want you to think about that from not a written disaster plan. I want you to think about it from a backpack. So I want you to make that your focus. I want you to shift it away from writing a bunch of things down to an actual backpack that you can carry. And so one of the things I do when I talk to people about this backpack is sometimes they say, well, I travel or I go to work somewhere and I can't carry that backpack with me. And I say, that's fine. That's great. Because all you need to do is you need to have little packets of things to help get you back to that backpack. But the key thing is to get you to that backpack as fast as you can. And it came to me because I've been working with businesses for a long time. I'd worked with Fortune 500 companies. And when you work in disaster preparedness with companies, their focus is on one thing: getting back into business.
That's
Getting
true.
back into business. You want to get back into business as fast as you can, right? And so as a continuity professional, that's what we call it. Disaster preparedness, when you work with companies, called business continuity. So you can tell you're trying to make the business continuous, right? So one of the things we would do is that we'll go to the company, and I used to do this. I used to go to the company and say, tell me all the processes you have to have working in order for you to continue to do what you're doing to make money. And so for example, so let's say we're talking about a restaurant. Okay. So they have to have a way to refrigerate food. They have to have a way to cook food. They have to have a way of delivering the food out to patrons, right? They have to have, they have to have the ability to have the patrons consume the food, right? So that's a fancy way of saying You got to have silverware, right? You got to have glassware. You got to have this. They have to have, you know what I mean? They have to have the ability to serve alcohol. That's the way that most, for those of you who've never been in the restaurant business, you may not know this, but alcohol is how most restaurants actually stay in business. And so I thought about that many years ago in terms of individuals. And so when I turn to them and say, listen, you don't need to write everything down. So instead, you're going to put it in a backpack. And you don't have to write it down. But what it does is the way the system I've developed, it's called the 5-pocket method. That's the method I want everyone to use. That method will go into a backpack. It'll provide you with everything you need to have, all the equipment, all the supplies, without having to do all that horrible writing everything down. And Jennifer, one of the things that, before I get into the method a little bit, I'm sure you're going to ask me about it. But before I do that, let me talk about this. Yesterday, I was with you and I was with your dog, Luna. And by the way, for those of you who've never seen Luna, you've never seen any of the YouTube shorts that Jennifer's put of this. This is the sweetest animal ever. She's a golden retriever. She's the sweetest dog. And so we're in the golf cart. She and I were taking a tour around the property. And so we're in the golf cart. And without even realizing, the dog was like in the back and she and I were in the front. We were talking about something or other. And all of a sudden the dog like almost like comes over the back seat and like lays on my shoulder practically, because she just wanted to be able to see straight ahead. She wanted to be part of the conversation. I thought it was very amusing, but she was a sweet animal. And so one of the things I think about when I tell people is I realize realistically people won't leave without their pets.
Nope.
This happened in Paradise. We're not going to talk about that. There's actually a couple of very tragic stories, extremely tragic, that are not worth discussing. But there's ones in Florida also during Hurricane Maria, where people literally would not leave their animals and they, as a result, drowned. But what I say to people is that backpack you have for yourself, you need to have a backpack for your dog. And for those of you who take care of someone, which I know is the full focus of the work you do they need to have a backpack also? Yes, they do. Absolutely, they need to have it. And the question is what goes in it? And I'll talk about that in a little bit. But what I want your focus to be on is don't worry about writing things down, because when I work with high net worth clients, okay, so I work with people who are celebrities sometimes. I work with celebrity athletes sometimes. These are people who don't want to write anything down. They don't want anything to read anything. They just want it to be something easy to use. And so I developed a method where all the equipment, all the supplies in the backpack act as like your portable headquarters. It gets you back into a place where you can continue to operate. Just like when I work with restaurants, I get them a backpack that gives them everything they need to get the business back started again. Then, because once you've done that, now you can start working with your pets. Now you can start taking care of the ones around you. And because you've already created the backpack, it's done instantaneously. So what I tell people is get back that backpack as fast as you can. And there are ways of doing that in ways that allow you to quickly access the backpack so that you can start working on your disaster response. But we need to change our perspective, I think, because realistically, writing things down simply doesn't work. It was a great idea, but just doesn't work for real.
Well, I think there's too many variables. Like, I live on a golf course. I live across the street from a lake. We're a fire-wise community, so the chances of a fire are lessened. I have been kind of griping that I live in a place called Lake of the Pines, and they have chopped down so many trees in the last couple of years, about to be lone pine. That's a joke. We still have lots of pine trees, but they take it very seriously.
When we were traveling around, there were tons of crews cutting trees down. There had to have been, when you and I were on that golf cart, we were just going on one street, essentially circumnavigating the property. But even then, I saw 4 or 5 different crews working independently, cutting trees down. So yeah, it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, they seem to have ramped it up even more this year, which, it's like sometimes after listening to those chainsaws all day, it's like, okay, I'm tired of that noise. But it's, where could the fire come from? It might come from the south. What if I don't think it would jump the lake. That would be I don't think that's possible, but you never know. So there's just so many variables on Is it a fire? Is it, we've had some pretty serious rains. Where, what about the wind? I live in a little bit of a valley, so we get a lot less wind than other parts of our community. I mean, it's just, I don't even, I think you'd have to have like a whole novel written down of, okay, scenario one, scenario two. That's too much to think about. And people don't, we don't want to think about those things. It's like, I'd rather listen to them chop down trees than think about what would I have to do to take care of, the two humans and the dog. Poor Luna. She has I'd have to pack a couch for you, wouldn't I, dog? So we're gonna talk about the backpacks because we're not writing stuff down too complicated. Where do we start with the backpacks?
All right. So the method I tell people to use, and you can use this with yourself. You can use this with someone you're taking care of. You could certainly take care of it with Luna. It applies to pets. In fact, I've done this with cats before. Weirdly enough, I've used this method many times. So what I want you to do is, first of all, I want you to start with an empty backpack. Totally empty backpack. That's it. And this empty backpack is going to be your backpack. So don't buy one of those pre-filled ones. Don't go to one of the big box stores. You've all seen them. Don't say you haven't. We've all seen them. It's those little red backpacks. I can't stand those things. They annoy me. As a matter of fact, I was on a TV show in the Midwest, and so we were talking about tornado preparedness, and so they actually brought in this red backpack, and they said, "Okay, Patrick, what do you think of this backpack?" And I took a knife. I carry this pocket knife with me everywhere I go, whenever I go on these shows because it's fun. I went to the bottom of the backpack. Oops, I muted myself. There you go. And I cut the bottom of the backpack and everything came crashing out and the news people were just shocked. And I said, we need to start with an empty backpack. And so I took a duct tape and I duct taped the part I cut open. And I said, okay, now we're going to start over and we're going to use the method that I've developed. And so the method that I've created is called the 5-pocket method. That's the method that I've used. This is a method that has worked extremely well with my clients. And it's something I now use everywhere. In fact, when we go down to Los Angeles, I'm going to be doing this on TV a few times because I want people to realize planning doesn't mean you have to have a plan. So you can plan without having a written plan down because, if you go to ready.gov, they have the written plans and stuff, but you're not going to do that. So let's create something that's easy. So 5 pockets, there's basically 5 areas of your backpack. The first one is physical. Okay, so physical. And so this is the stuff that we're all used to, but instead of just simply throwing things in there like you were talking about, like your mom did or whoever, like we threw everything in the trunk, what I want you to do is I want you to think about it based on your processes. Okay, so do you need to be able to breathe? Yep. So we're going to have a mask. Are we going to need to be able to see? Yep. So we probably need to have some kind of goggles or smoke goggles of some kind, because fire can happen everywhere. As a matter of fact, I actually tell every person from Sea to Shining Sea. I was actually in South Florida giving a presentation. I talked about smoke goggles, and they go, "What are you talking about?" I go, "We're in a high-rise building. If you have to evacuate, if you've never been in a fire before, you don't realize it's not like it is on TV. It's not like that. Your eyes will burn. It is extremely hard to see and extremely hard to breathe." So what I say is, okay, so we have to have goggles, and then we have to have things like water so we can drink a little bit. So because we want to have a little bit of water, you don't have to have bottles and bottles and bottles of water. You can just have a few of the packets of water, and then you can also have water purification tablets. So and then you want to have a little space blanket. Again, I don't know what kind of blanket she had in her trunk, but
Yep.
this doesn't have to be. Was it one of those large
Oh, I think she had
blankets?
several blankets. I think she had a comforter. The entire trunk. I don't know if you're familiar with the size of a Honda Accord trunk.
Oh, yes. My father had one for many years.
Yeah, I do too. And I have a hybrid, so it doesn't fold,
Yep.
the seats don't fold down. But I can almost put my entire road bike in my trunk. Not
Yeah.
quite. The handlebars, I think, stick out. So I can't, but that's
What,
a lot. And it was literally stuff you could not use it for groceries or, Christmas gifts. I mean, it was like, and I think she had canned food in there. Because you always hear, you're like, well, for each person, you need X number of gallons of water per. And I'm thinking, well, I wouldn't be able to evacuate with, like a
carrying bottles and bottles and bottles of water. You're never going to be able to do that, right? And even the blankets, like there are blankets that you can purchase. And in fact, when I do this drill, I train everybody and show them all the equipment, I'm going to show them blankets that are used by campers that are literally they are hiking in the Adirondacks and they're hiking, the big trails and all that, the Thousand Trails, the famous Thousand Trails and all that. And they are blankets that we can use that allow you to maintain your temperature. Ponchos are good. So there's like a series of things physically. You don't have time to get into it today, but there's certain things physically that we need to have. A little bit of food, but I'm very careful about food, and I'll talk about food because one of the things I did this. I was at an RV park, like I was mentioning earlier. I work quite extensively in outdoor hospitality, so I was at this RV park and I delivered a presentation because they'd hired me, and so I was training the staff and stuff. And a couple people, I was happening to be walking out, and a couple people walked up to me and said, "Hey, we saw you sort of thundering away in there and talking to people. We are people who are traveling the country. We just retired, so we're driving around the country. We're literally we started, we lived in Nevada and we're going all around the country and come back." And I said, "Okay." And they said, "Will you take a look at our disaster backpack?" And I said, "Sure, why not?" So I said, "I have a few minutes before because there was like a lunch line. So I thought, well, I don't got to do that. So I'll just wait." So they took out their backpack and they laid it all out, like I told them, lay it all on the table. And I commented on things. Probably don't need this. Probably don't need that. Maybe you need to include this and all that. And that's fine. But one of the things they had in there was the emergency food. And it was this hockey puck. That's what I call it. I call it hockey puck food. It's those MREs, and we've all seen them before, right? They're all vacuum sealed and everything. So they said, "Okay, this is the food we're going to have." I took out that same knife, the one I always have on me with me. I opened it up and I cut the thing open. And Jennifer, you should have seen the look on their face. They were just like, their eyes were just wide open. And they said, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm serving you lunch." I said, "You're serving us lunch? We're going to eat this?" I said, "Yes, we're going to eat it." I said, "Have you ever had it?" They said, "No, we haven't ever had it before." And I said, "Then we need to have it now because you don't want to have it during the disaster. That's too late." Right? So we want to actually test it in advance. So that's one of the things I say to people all the time. If you're going to have food, fine, but make sure that it's food that you can actually consume. And actually, a lot of the camping food, I actually have a video coming out because I actually bought from 6 different companies 30 days worth of supplies, and they're all in buckets, 30 days worth of food. And I'm going to sample every single food from every one of these companies because I want people to see, does this stuff really taste good? And some stuff, Jennifer, I can tell you, tastes awful. Some of it's great. Some of it's pretty awful. But what I say to people is, regardless, if you're going to have it, you need to try it first.
That actually makes sense. No sense in making yourself more miserable in a terrible situation. And now if you get food that's just nasty, it's like you're just compounding the misery. So that actually makes good sense. And if you're caring for somebody, a loved one, like my mom with dementia, you know, you need to make sure they're going to eat. So if it's hockey puck looking dehydrated, God
Right.
knows what.
Right, exactly. And it actually tastes not bad. It tastes like kind of like an apple fritter, or kind of like a dried apple fritter is what it tastes like, which isn't bad. The problem is that they couldn't eat it because one of them had celiac disease and couldn't consume gluten of any kind. And they said, "Is there gluten in here?" And I said, "Yes, it has something in here called Bukiko flour, which they have a lot in a lot of MREs. It's basically Bukiko flour essentially is highly proteinized flour. It's where because in most flour, they cut that part off. They don't include that because it's hard to churn, takes extra time. So most of the flour you get doesn't have that in it. But Bukiko flour, which is used in Japan quite a lot, they have that. And they said, "I can't eat any of this stuff. I can't have any of it." And so I said, it's a good thing we found this out now versus during the disaster when you're starving and now you can't eat this. Because now your choice is consume it and get ill, or not consume it and be starving, which will impact your psychological health. It'll impact the way you behave. It'll impact everything. So one of the things I say is the physical side is the side that people work on the most, but it's something that you need to actually try it. Do you actually need to pull the blankets out? Yeah. Do you actually need to try the ponchos on? Yeah. Do you actually need to try these? Yes. You need to try the flashlights. And so one of the things I advocate, for example, of flashlights that I think a lot of people don't realize is I advocate 3 different kinds of flashlights should be in your backpack. You should have some kind of a wearable light, like what runners have on, you know what I mean? So something, or like one of miners' helmets. I actually do that. Actually, I have that a lot of times where I'll tell people, put it on your head so you can do dishes in the dark.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And right. And then you should have what's called a hand light, right? Which we all know about those, but you can find different kinds of hand lights that are not the traditional 90-cent ones you find in the backpack, finding really good ones. And then the last one is have like a lantern light. You can actually open them up, you can actually pull them apart, and there's a light, and it's like a lantern room light. That's what I sort of call them, because they basically illuminate the room a little bit so that they give you what you need so you can be able to see in cases you don't have generators and things, right? And then and so the physical side covers so many different things, but I just find that people just throw stuff in there and go, well, I'm gonna throw canned food in there. I go, okay, so where's your can opener? You really get, yeah, and I actually ask people this. I really mean this. Actually, I've had this before. I was at a location, I was at a skilled nursing facility. And you can understand this. At skilled nursing facilities, when there are major disasters, staff live in the facility. There's actually a room. So anyway, so one of them decided that, they were going to try out this black beans that they had, and they had a can of black beans with them. And I said, have you ever eaten black beans before, right out of the can? And they say no. And I'm like, then give me your can opener. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll replace this can of beans. If you're worried about the money, I'll replace it. This 90s, I'll give you $1 and you can go buy a new one. But I want you to test it right now for lunch. And we were in the lunchroom, and literally everyone stopped eating to watch this, watch this little thing happening. And she opened the can up, and she couldn't believe it didn't taste good. She was like, it has this, it's not cooked. So it has a chewy flavor, and it tastes raw. And I said to her, that's the reason why you need to test it out. And she goes, well, I can put this can under a fire. And I said, you can't, because if you do that, you'll get carcinogens. So they've designed cans now where you can't do that. And so it's a kind of thing where it's good to learn that stuff in advance. So the first pocket is physical. The second pocket is psychological, and people forget this stuff all the time, right? For psychological, it's what I tell people is carry something with you. And I think you could appreciate this, Jennifer, of anybody with the kind of populations you work with. Having something that gives you comfort, whether it's a book of some kind, like a religious text, or it's a photograph, or it's a teddy bear, even if there's little kids. Or I say this to teenagers. I was actually speaking at a high school, and I mentioned the whole 5-pocket method, and somebody said, well, what do you think that we should carry around? I said, do you play Nintendo Switch? And all the hands raised. And I go, then a Nintendo Switch needs to go in your disaster backpack. And the teachers were all like shocked. And I said, if that focuses you, if that calms you and gets you to a place where you can focus, that's what I want you to have. And so the psychological end of it, with people, for example, who have dementia, like when they start sundowning, one of the things that's so important, I say this to nursing facilities all the time, you're now going to be on shift when these people are sundowning, and you have to be able to deal with that, right? And so there are things that'll help make them comfortable, and those are things that are really, really important that you have to have. So you have something psychologically, something that relaxes you. And I actually do this. I'm actually going to New York in a few weeks, and I'm doing this thing where I'm actually taking a backpack for a working professional, and I'm going to make it over. And this guy showed me, I was on a podcast a lot like this, and he pulls out his backpack. This was unplanned, totally unplanned, Jennifer. We didn't talk about this in advance, in the pre-meeting, in the producer meeting, nothing. He just pulls out the backpack, and he says, I'm going to show you everything in my backpack, and I want you to tell me what you think. And I'm going to say this. I want your reaction to this, Jennifer. I want to hear what you think about this. So he pulls out the backpack, and I went through, okay, physical, had the ABC, he goes, fine. Then we got the psychological, and I'm kidding you not. This is on tape. He pulls out a bottle of Johnny Walker Black Label right there. He goes, I have this in my backpack, and I have never seen anybody do that before, where they had alcohol. And so, and alcohol is not generally a good thing to have with you in a disaster, because number one, it impedes your ability to make decisions. It's easy to over imbibe. I want you sharp. I know that for some people it's like a medication, but I say to people, it's kind of shocking. And the look on your face, for those of you who are not able to see her, she had kind of a shocked reaction because it's kind of amazing that anybody would really do that. So, um,
My
so the psych,
psychological tool would probably be like, it'd have to be something artistic. So I
okay,
would think like colored pencils and a pad of paper.
lovely.
Just there's actually um a type of drawing. It's called neurographic drawing. It's actually designed to calm your brain. It's real
Oh,
simple. I've done some YouTube shorts on it, and I'm actually doing um another YouTube live that's like an art therapy session for caregivers, and she's going to be doing collage because you can collage things together and kind of process feelings and emotions. I don't have a lot of like I'm a digital reader. I don't reread things, so I don't have magazines and I don't have stuff to collage without buying it. So she's gonna be doing that. I'm gonna be doing the neurographic drawing. And the neurographic drawing is actually really amazing how it really
wow.
calms your brain. It's really good for people who have anxiety or, other mental health struggles. And, dealing with a person with dementia, that's enough struggle. But in a disaster, you would seriously need something to do to
Well, and that's absolutely right. And that's the reason why I say, when people say, well, I've got my disaster backpack and I got the stuff for my dog and I got the stuff for my person I'm taking care of, I go, no, 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 no. Everyone gets their own backpack. Everyone gets their own backpack. So, like the story you're talking about in the Palisades, he should have had his own backpack. Each one, the person he's taking care of should have his own backpack because that person's physical needs are different than his. Some things are the same, obviously, but there are things that are going to be different as well. Psychologically, there's going to be things differently, and so those are things that become really important in disaster where you're trying to make decisions very, very rapidly, right? And we're seeing how fast wildfires are moving now. There's actually a fire as you and I are speaking. There's a fire going on down south, and it is moving very, very rapidly. That complex fire is moving, and it's not contained. I think it's only like 2% contained. So they're trying. And so what I say to people is I say, if the wind changes, all of a sudden you go from being, we don't have to evacuate you. Oh, I got to pack up and grab things. Don't pack up and grab things. Just pick up your disaster backpack and then leave, because that's really what all you're going to have time for. Unfortunately, I know we want to try to pack up our house. I know we want to do this and that. We can't do that. So those are the two areas. The third area is the personal area. And actually, when people ask me about this stuff, things like keys. Have your keys, have extra pair of glasses. One of the reasons why I don't think you don't have to write everything down for planning for evacuations is have a key for wherever you're going to go. That means that you've talked to the person where you're going to actually go. So you have a key to their house. Make sure you have the security code. If they've said to you, hey, listen, you can come here, get their key in advance and just put that in your backpack. Now you don't have to write all of it down. Here's where it is. You know what I mean? And then have maps. That's the other thing I say. Have maps in there. Again, you don't have to have a whole plan in there. Just have a simple map. Just have a map of where you need to go if there's no GPS. So it's physical, psychological, and personal. And then the last two are easy. Papers and phone. So for papers, things like e-papers, when I talk about e-papers, things like your laptop, your tablet, things like that, where it has your digital, like I know someone actually has a thumb drive with all their personal information on it. Perfect. And then hard copy files too. And I know that this is important for a lot for the populations you work with, because you need to have some of their paperwork, their insurance cards, whatever. These are paperwork on things that are going to matter, especially if they're going to unfamiliar providers, if something were to occur. So physical papers and the digital papers, and then the last one is your phone. And when I talk about phone, not just having your phone itself, because we all carry this thing, but it's also having a charger. It's also having some kind of solar charger, maybe even having a backup phone. Like if they don't ask you to take your old phone back, great. Put it in your emergency backpack. There's your emergency phone if your other phone's destroyed. So that's sort of the 5-pocket method I tell people. And we don't have time to go into all of it today, but basically within those 5, that'll give you enough to get you back into place. Now you can assist the people around you and your loved ones and your pets.
That makes sense. So I know the father and son in the Palisades area didn't evacuate because they the son needed a wheelchair, and I didn't get the details as to why they couldn't evacuate with the wheelchair. I guess they could get out of the house, but then what? And it's not uncommon for people with dementia to end up bedbound. So, what would we do with loved ones in that scenario? Because I know one of the problems was there's just not enough emergency personnel to deal with. I don't know how many square miles Palisades was, but LA is really super populated. It's its own little country by itself, pretty much. There's just not enough people to go around, so we have to be reliant on ourselves. How can we be reliant on ourselves if we've got like physical disabilities? Because I think that was what struck me was like, they can't ideal in an ideal world, the emergency personnel would be like, we need to go to this place because physical disabilities, whereas this other place, maybe they're just whatever, like normal people, air quotes on normal.
Well, one of the things I say is that, first of all, the time to find this out is now. And if you can't do it, so one of the things I do, for example, in skilled nursing facilities is this. Because there are just not enough nurses to go around when they have to move people, I say, your dietary people, yeah, they need to learn how to move the residents too. The people who are administrative staff, the people who work at the front desk, they need to know how to do that also. It doesn't mean they're going to do technical movements, because there's people who are on ventilators and things. If you have like vent patients, clearly non-medical personnel are not going to, when I used to be a medic, for example, like I tell people, don't try to move vent patients because you have to move the person, the equipment has to move with them, and there's a certain way of handling it isn't worth it. But just like you said, there just isn't enough of the medical emergency personnel to go around, but that's okay because the most severe are the ones that they're realistically going to be able to focus on. But what I say to people, and I say this to every single person, every one of the members of the audience today, is you need to assume that no one's coming. That's the first thing you
Unfortunately.
need to assume. You need to assume no one's coming. And what I don't want to hear, because I hear this all the time from people. I have a neighbor who was a nurse at UCLA, and she went to Harvard, and she was an Olympian, and she was this and that, or so and so was a doctor, or this is what I hear the most. So and so was a fire captain, which is ironic because you and I ran into a fire captain.
Yeah, my next door neighbor is a retired fire chief.
There you go, exactly. So, but that's true. But it doesn't mean that that person will necessarily be available in the disaster to be able to help you, especially when you're that person's neighbor, but that person also has 5 other neighbors or 10 other neighbors or many other people know that person's there, and they are going to call him too and say, hey, listen, will you come and help us? And he go, well, I can't help 30 people because then I'm not evacuating. So what I
Well,
say,
they may not be home. Just simple, what if
right,
my neighbor's at the grocery store?
or he's in Barbados on, retirement, or he's in an RV, right, traveling the country with his wife. Right? I'm just making this up here, whatever, right? So the person could absolutely be gone, and you have to figure out a way to do it. So what I say to everyone is, I say, you need to know how to do this by yourself. If you physically can't do it, then I'm just saying this to you, there are mechanical ways of being able to move people. It's not perfect, and I'm not able to recommend anyone for legal reasons, but there actually are companies where when I was a medic, I actually saw these. And then when I started actually writing disaster programs for skilled facilities, I said, get 5 or 6 of this because this particular piece of equipment will really help. One which I'm happy to talk to people about is, well, when they live in high rises. Okay, I tell people there are sleds, reliable sleds, where you can sled people down. Is it fast going? No, it's slow, but it will get you out. It'll get you out in a reasonable period of time if you have to evacuate, right? So it's better than nothing, because otherwise, when people say to me, well, I got to use the elevator, I go, well, the elevator may not be available to you.
Yeah, they tell you not to use the elevators in emergencies.
Yeah, and I actually go into this conversation with people who work in high rises, and I say, do you know how to get down the emergency stairs? Oh, no, I don't do that. I go, well, it's Friday afternoon. Guess what? We're going down the emergency stairs. Oh, I don't have the shoes for that. Oh, I'm not in shape for that. I go, well, then that's something we learned today then, didn't we? Now we need to get you a better pair of shoes for your workplace backpack, and something so that we can get, and we actually have to practice. You need to put the shoes on, and then during one day, like a Friday, just go down the stairs, go down the emergency stairs. You know where it is. You know how to get down. Those are all things that become so important. It was important during 9/11. A lot of people didn't know about
Mhm.
stairwell C. And that's obvious. For those of us who know about 9/11, about the stories around 9/11, we all know very few people knew about stairwell C. That's why stairwell C was totally empty. It was totally empty. And so what I say to folks is, if you are not able to move the person you're with, you need to make arrangements so that you can handle it on your own, either through mechanical means or some other methodology to get them out, because there are ways of doing that. There are services you can pay for where they'll come out in a disaster to actually help you to move. I mean, they're not going to do anything else, but they will help you to move the person and then do that. But those arrangements you have to make in advance. Do you have to pay in advance? Yes, you do. You have to make deposits. Those are things they'll do. But then again, if you realize these problems in advance, then you can solve them, because you don't want to have to solve them during the emergency. So I deal with this also with animal shelters. I deal with this all the time, where I say, how many dogs do you have here? They say, well, I have 150. So they have 150 Lunas. They have 150 Lunas. Okay, Lord. And I just go, how many staff you got? Oh, 10. 10 staff. And I said, well, in a disaster, you're going to get about 2, maybe 3 if you're lucky, because there's roadblocks. I mean, you and I both live in wildfire country. They have roadblocks, and then no one's coming through except who's already there. So these are things that create alternate arrangements. You can move the animals. And so I train them how to rapidly crate animals, how to rapidly move them, how to get the right kind of trucks and things. And that's what ends up making them the biggest difference in being able to handle that. So that's what I told them.
We were talking about physically learning how to move a disabled person out of the building, and then you said there was services that you may or may not be able to utilize.
Yes, both.
But
And there's also mechanical means also.
right,
There are
but
mechanical means
I
also.
still think you need to know how to do it yourself and have the tools, because what if they can't get to you because
Totally.
trees are down, or there's a tree burning across the road. I mean, it sounds
You
dramatic,
bet.
but it
Oh, no, no, no.
happens.
Oh, no, no, no. You hit the nail on the head precisely. That's why I tell everyone, assume no one is coming. When I said no one, I also mean the people you've paid to come. You need to assume. So what I say is, always have backups, always have a way to do it yourself. And if you continually, no matter what you do, always have the assumption in your head, I'm on my own. You'd be amazed how much that changes your behavior and how you plan. Because whenever I hear people, oh, I'll just call so and so, I go, so and so ain't coming. I've been doing this business for 20 years. They're not coming. That's it. And so you have to rely on that stuff on your own. So it's something for every single person to think about. And that's one of the things that we'll do also when I come down to the property and I run this amazing drill.
Well, we're looking forward to that. Do you have any last minute advice specifically for caregivers of people with dementia and disaster preparedness? Just or am I throwing you a curveball?
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. Have their backpacks ready in advance. Have the backpacks done in advance. Just like everything we're talking about. And as a matter of fact, one of the things I'm doing on my YouTube channel is I'm going to have 30 videos for 30 days, starting from an empty backpack to a full backpack, going through everything I talked about over this last hour, but going into much more detail. And what I would say is that don't try to pack everything the day of the disaster. So if you have someone who has severe dementia, and this, I know we laugh, but people really do this. They don't do any planning and then they wonder. And so you should have that backpack prepared in advance and include them. And one of the things I say with people who have dementia is you need to observe them and say, what is going to make this person comfortable? Because it's going to be a very uncomfortable situation. So at a minimum, give them something that will make them comfortable, so that when you have the backpack, you have all their physical needs taken care of as best you can, all that. But then also something that will, because one of the things that'll actually happen and will hinder evacuations is when people try to evacuate demented people and they'll say, hey, I'm not going to leave without blank. I won't leave without this thing or that thing. And so what I say with dementia, make sure that they have that one thing they won't leave without. Please make sure you include that. Make room in the backpack for that thing. It can't be something huge, but something that if the worst came to worst, I'll have something available specifically for them to be able to relax them in a tough situation.
That
This
makes
happened
sense.
to
I don't know. I don't.
teenagers too.
Yeah, for real. I don't know what that would have been the last year or so of my mom's life, but like
Mhm.
when I took over her care, it would have been her awful purse. I would have wanted to let that thing burn or whatever, float away in the flood. Um, Chances are burning is more what we'd be dealing with. So it's helpful to know that despite my initial reaction, and she didn't have anything important in it, but being a woman of a certain age, it was amazing all the ladies that would carry their purses around the memory care. And then as
Yes, I've noticed that too. I noticed that too. Yeah, they always wanted to have their purse with them,
oh,
but with
gotta
like
have that purse.
they gotta have it. Yeah. And so make that part of your disaster kit. Don't fight it. That's a reason why I say get a backpack that's specific for them. And actually, the purse gives you a little bit of room. You can put some things in there, probably, right? So, but just making sure that those things are there. I love that story because that's just so important because you're absolutely right. Those are familiar things that'll make a big difference, especially as you're trying to move someone from one place to somewhere else, especially an unfamiliar place, which may happen in a disaster.
Well, hopefully, my listeners will not ever have to use their disaster backpacks that they're going to start working on tomorrow after they've listened to this.
Yes.
But now we've at least helped them understand some things because my instinct would be like have my emergency backpack, but then like shove a ton of crap into my car. Pillows, clothes, my backup hard drive for my computer. Most of my stuff's in Dropbox, so I wouldn't have to worry about it. But it's like, depending on how much time I have like a hierarchy of things I'd start shoving into my car. So maybe I'll have to rethink that. But hopefully, I know caregivers that have had to evacuate for wildfires. Fortunately, none of their homes burned, but unfortunately, I think our the percentage possibility is going up every year, which is just frustrating. So I
Well,
really,
one of the things I think that people need to understand now about wildfires is one of the things that has been an astonishing and sort of an astonishing phenomenon as an emergency professional. And the reason why I'm about to mention what I'm about to mention is because it changes so much of what we do. It's not the size of the fires; it's the speed of them, how fast they are burning. So literally, what you are saying, I hear from people all the time. Oh, I'm just going to grab this and throw this in my car and throw that in my car and throw these. And I go, you may not have the time. Paradise was a wake up call. The August Complex fire was another one that also happened in August of 2020. That was a massive fire. That was what we call a gig fire, which was 1 million contiguous acres. And it wasn't even the size that really shocked us. It was how quickly it was burning through all these counties. Marin, everything else, half Marin was on fire. It was amazing. Whole wineries burned to the floor. The Francis Ford Coppola winery burned in like 25 minutes. And I thought they were making that up. I said, that can't be right. And I looked at the fire I looked at the fire reports. That's how fast it burned down. That's shocking. So it
yeah.
speeds. So when I see people and I talk to people and they go, well, I'm gonna do this, go, no, 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 no. Now is not the time for that. That's why your backpack gives you the minimum things you need so you'll survive. You're not gonna, you know what I mean? But you got to evacuate. Don't let stuff hold up your evacuation. That's the thing I worry about. But I understand the temptation is to grab everything. That's why I say if we do it in advance, we have a nice backpack, we can put it in there, then at least we won't lose anything we absolutely have to have.
Well, let's hope we don't have to utilize the backpacks. I really appreciate that you reached out to me and suggested this topic because when the email popped in, I was like, how is it that I've not ever done this topic? It's like, believe there's a fire not far from us in El Dorado County, which I think is
There
between
is.
us.
Right.
So it's not like the threat is not regular. So yeah, I was shocked, and it's like I really appreciate that you have the knowledge and the expertise to address disaster preparedness for my specific audience because this is a little bit more challenging when you're caring for somebody with a disability or a dementia or whatever. So I really appreciate it. Patrick's YouTube channel will be linked in the show notes, so you can go over there and watch all the good stuff. Eventually, the event that we're doing in my community will be on that channel, so stay tuned for that. And thanks so very much, Patrick.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. And yeah, that's going to be a tremendous event. And so, yes, my YouTube channel is Disaster Patrick, and go on there. I have a video of me evacuating 240 cats in 90 minutes. I just yesterday put up a video of when I went down to the Palisades and actually showed people what to do if your house burns down to wildfire, how to protect yourself when you return to your house afterwards. And the video we are going to do is going to be astonishing in its breadth. It's going to be so much fun. It's not doom and gloom. It's not blood and guts. It's just going to be a really great, empowering video. So I encourage everyone. We're going to be filming it late October, and then the video will go up likely in early November. But it's going to be so much fun. It's going to be a great day. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to prepare so many people in a short period of time. And so for those of you who are trying to learn how to disaster prepare on my channel, I will have tons of videos for you. But Jennifer, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure being here. I really enjoyed it very much. And if you ever need me to come back, I'd be happy to come back and we can talk about specific disasters or so many other things. But thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining me.